We start on time and end on time. For those of you that have been following, this is the Talent EVV virtual session series. So this is now our 4th of 5 virtual sessions. Our first one that we covered was Live Well. Our second was population growth. Our third was educational attainment. This one will be around jobs and wage growth. So for those of you that haven't been plugged in or don't know a whole lot about Talent EVV, it really is the Evansville region's regional development plan. So it's our strategic plan to help create and foster quality of life and quality of place for the Evansville region and for the residents and the future residents that are going to live here. So this series and virtual session is going to be recorded. Please feel free to follow up. Share this with your friends. You can go to www.evvregion.com. If you haven't been plugged into Talent EVV, what was Talent 2025 thus far, please feel free to go out to that site. Our other recorded sessions are on there. Should give you a good idea and kind of an insight to what the project and the plan is all about and what our community is doing to help advance quality of life and quality of place for the residents here. So a lot of great information out there, and just would really encourage you all to go out there and take a look. So we have some great speakers today. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening as it relates to jobs and wage growth across the Evansville region and actually from a state perspective. So really looking forward to diving into some information with you all. I will say what we'll do first is we'll kind of tee up this conversation with data. So I always think it's important to ground ourselves in what's the reality that we're seeing, what's the data showing us and informing us on, and how does that help to inform strategies and tactics that stakeholders, employers, companies, nonprofit partners, and other community leaders are leaning into across our region and at a state level. So I think grounding ourselves in data is always extremely important. Secondly, this is an open dialogue. We're going to cover a lot of ground today, but if you have questions as we go through the presentation and the discussion, drop your questions or comments in the chat. We'll come back to those. We've got about 10 minutes built into the schedule today. That way we can have some interactive discussion at the end today. But without further ado, I will go ahead and let the panel or the discussion leaders introduce themselves. So I'll start with Tara. Do you want to kick us off and go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler, and thanks for having me today. My name is Tara Pearson. I'm from Connexus, Indiana. My role at Connexus is Senior Director of Research and Public Sector Engagement, which means that I work on our network community team, kind of driving our research.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tara. And sure. Jasmine?
Good morning. My name is Jasmine Mounsell. I am an HR coordinator at Deaconess. I oversee all of our student programs, and I drive all of our observations, internship opportunities, step up, and tuition reimbursement programs here at Deaconess.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. And Mersada?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Mersada Salihovic, Vice President of Human Resources at AmeriQual, and specifically here today to talk about our RAMP program in partnership with EVSC.
Thank you, Mersada. And finally, Eric.
Oh, great. Thanks. Happy to be here. I'm Eric Steele with Elevate Ventures. I'm an entrepreneur in residence and work with the companies throughout the region and the state. Really Elevate being venture capital and venture development organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So we're moving on here. So why jobs and wage growth, right? So jobs and wages are the driving force of our regional economy. So you can see here across the 5 focus areas of Talent EVV, jobs and wage growth really help to attract young professionals to a place that emphasize high wage and high skill occupations. A highly educated workforce increases wage growth and incentivizes new jobs, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Upward mobility, families and individuals improve self-sufficiency through high wages and jobs. Finally, Live Well, quality and quantity of life improves for residents as more high wage jobs are created and filled. So as we get into the data and some of the conversations about strategic priorities, I hope the thread that you're starting to see here is that each of these strategies is very intentional on how does it interrelate and interlock to the other focus areas of Talent EVV. So if you look at each one of these sections, they don't stand alone, but they really are interconnected with each other. And the strategies that have been developed and the stakeholders that have been brought to the table are very intentional in terms of how we think about building quality and quantity of life here in the Evansville region. So I think that's an important theme that I want everyone to keep in mind this morning as we go through the discussion. So what are the goals, right? The first goal is we want to increase wages by $10,000 in the Evansville region. And you can see there in 2022, the data that we captured is actually showing that we've increased the wages by about a little bit more than 15,000, which is really fantastic, right? So we're already moving to an aspirational state of wage growth, right? You'll see here in a couple slides that there is some nuance and complexity to that data, but we are keeping track of that and we're informing our direction through those that understanding. The second one is we want to grow jobs by 5,000, right? So we want high wage, high growth jobs to be growing by 5,000. So you'll see here, we've actually got a negative 4,700 jobs, right? So why are we seeing a decline in employment and a decline in jobs? Well, you'll see here on the chart that I'm going to pull up here shortly that this decline is really due to COVID-19, right? So we saw an increase of jobs shut down, of employers potentially close their businesses. There's some pros and cons to all of that, but what we understand and what we're seeing through the data is that we are starting to trend back upwards on that, which is really great. All right, so here's the data, right? Employment growth. So if you can see here, this is what I just talked about. Around 2020, right, when COVID set in, we saw a sharp decline in employment data. But again, as you look at 2020 on up into 2021, 2022, you can see that data is really starting to trend back upwards. And the most recent data that's not depicted on this graph for 2022 really shows that we're almost at pre-pandemic levels, which is really fantastic. It shows that we've got a resilient economy. Of course, you know, if you look there, we are benchmarking ourselves against peer and aspirational regions. They're also rebounding. So it's important that we keep moving forward on how do we think about growing our economy? How do we think about growing our market here in the Evansville region? Average annual wages, right? So this is just really strictly looking at what are folks making as workers in the Evansville region. And what you'll see here is not dissimilar from the employment slide, right? It trends very well with our peer and aspirational communities. And in fact, some of the encouraging news here is that if you look across the board, we're competing really well with Fort Wayne, Roanoke, Spartanburg, very closely. A few of those were actually outcompeting them in average annual wages. So this is an area that we keep a really close eye on. Wages are related to self-sufficiency. They're related to upward mobility of individuals and families, also related to educational attainment. So again, that thread that all of these things are interconnected really informs how we build out strategies and tactics for Talent EVV. All right, and this is kind of a really illuminating slide, right? So we all are familiar with what happened during COVID in terms of inflation and what we've seen coming out of that. This slide really depicts real average annual wage, right? So when we think about average annual wage, that's looking at what's the average wages of workers in the Evansville region. What this slide is really depicting is really a justification for the inflation that we're seeing in the economy. So some of that buying power that really was articulated in that previous slide is actually not as significant as what we thought in the past. So this is something to keep an eye on. Of course, all communities are facing inflation in a really similar way. So this isn't unique to the Evansville region, but it is something that we want to understand further so we can really understand buying power and what households are being faced with. All right, here's kind of a good summary wrap up for our dashboard, right? So you can see here, we've actually pulled out 4 or 5 different peer and aspirational communities to really understand what's a snapshot of economic development and jobs and wage growth across the Evansville region as it relates to those communities. And I think want to call out a few really encouraging points. So if you look all the way to the right, under Fortune 1000 companies. We're number one. We have 3, whereas Chattanooga has 1, right? So this is definitely an asset of the Evansville region. And when we're thinking about developing strategies and tactics, engaging companies, engaging stakeholders, this is something that we really keep in mind and really pay attention to, right? So the first thing is we want to keep those companies here. We want to make sure that they're headquartered here. We want to make sure that they're working directly with our higher ed partners to really understand what's that talent pipeline for them and all of those things. The second piece is you look at exports per worker. We're number 2, right? With only, Quad Cities really in front of us. So this, again, another promising statistic here. And I think what that really articulates to us is that we've got, we've got a really a critical mass of advanced manufacturing partners in the region. And what this is showing us is that we've got an opportunity to really accelerate what we're doing in terms of exports and what we're doing in terms of business expansion for those manufacturers and other partners that may be exporting. And then I think a couple of things to really keep an eye on here, things that we would love to see grow over the next, 3 to 5 years are really kind of that bottom line, right? So self-employment, young firms, and funded startups. You can see on the funded startups, Chattanooga, which is CHT acronym on there, has funded 67 startups over the past year. We've funded 19. That I think, and you'll hear a little bit later from Eric on why this is of value to the Evansville region specifically. But I think those statistics right there on the bottom are something that we're paying really close attention to. We're being really intentional about some economic development strategies that are coming to fruition that hopefully can continue to advance the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem here in the region. But again, when you think about buying power, when you think about self-sufficiency, being an entrepreneur is one of those ways to kind of create some really direct upward mobility for families and individuals. All right, that is all the data. Let's talk about strategic priorities. So for those of you that have participated in the last sessions, each of them have strategic priorities, right? So for us here at Jobs and Wage Growth, these are going to be really specific to economic development and what we can do as a region to partner with employers and companies and our higher ed partners to really ensure that this ecosystem is interconnected, it's interlocked, it's working together, not against each other. So really 3 things here: cluster development, talent pipelines, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And of course, our speakers today are going to dive into these strategic priorities from the perspective that they have at their organization and their employer. So I'm not going to dive too far into those because I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, but I think you all will see as we go through this slide deck how intentional and aligned each of these strategies really are. So I'm going to kind of tee up cluster development and then I'll hand it over to Tara here shortly. But what is cluster development? How are we defining it, right? It's a buzzword. Folks on this call may not be working in economic development day in and day out. So how do we really ground ourselves in cluster development? Well, one, it's a group of interrelated businesses or institutions, pretty simply put. Secondly, a regional public-private assets that complement or support the interrelated businesses or institutions. Okay, how do our municipalities, how do our academic institutions work with private companies? Third, a competitive advantage or unique value proposition connected to this alignment. So why is collaboration creating a competitive advantage in an ecosystem, in an industry, in a subsector of an industry? So think about why would a private company partner with a public asset, right? That's essentially what that third box is really showing us. So how do we really understand what that looks like in a visual? So what I've done here is I've laid out really what an ecosystem for healthcare might look like, right? So if you think about yourself as a consumer, then individual, you have a lot of different players when it comes to your healthcare and your healthcare providers, right? So you've got primary care, you've got your pharmacies, your RXs, you've got your payers, your insurance companies, you've got your regulators and policymakers, and finally you have your specialists. So if we go back to this slide right here, these three boxes really start to align and connect what you're seeing in this graphic, right? So consumers need access to all these different interrelated businesses and ecosystems to really support their needs as a consumer in the healthcare system, right? So, and again, this is just one way of articulating what an industry ecosystem might look like. But the value of really diving into this and understanding it is that it really informs the rest of the strategic priorities within the thriving workforce, jobs and wage growth focus area, because this is how we think about our industries and how we need to think about advancing our industries, right? So if we switch gears to advanced manufacturing, what's one of the ways that we're actually developing our advanced manufacturing cluster, right? So I saw we've got some folks on here that are in the manufacturing space. Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing are buzzwords, but what does that really mean, right? And how at EREP are we really informing ourselves around specific cluster development for our manufacturing partners? Well, we're doing that through data, right? So if you look here at this graphic, data really informs every aspect of your business operations as a manufacturer, right? And this is what allows you to become more streamlined, more smart, if you want to kind of use that as a term here. And this is not an anomaly for manufacturing, but this is really can be a graphic that could be crossed into healthcare, into other sectors. But using data to inform your transformation as a company is just a really specific aspect of cluster development that we at EREP look at. And I think you'll see here shortly with Tara's presentation, it goes even deeper into how data and digital transformation can potentially inform our manufacturing sector, right? So really, I'm teeing up the conversation here in terms of what's the big picture of jobs and wage growth, and how do we really get into this kind of messy, complex area and start to make sense of all the things that are happening in both our two largest sectors, right? So manufacturing being our largest and healthcare being our fastest growing. And then finally, what we're looking at here at EREP for cluster development and with our other economic development partners is a business retention and expansion program, right? So it's pretty simple, right? So we need to offer individualized business assistance and resource support, develop specific market strategies, and better understand the business climate of regional economies. So I think this really wraps up nicely both the ecosystem understanding that I walked you all through and the digital transformation, right? Like the ecosystem understanding is really offering individualized assistance and resource support, because we understand what you all need as industry partners, as employers, as companies. We help to develop specific market strategies. So that's where the digital transformation comes into place. We know that our manufacturers are more efficient and more effective and create more output when they're informed through data. And finally, better understand the business climate of regional economies. So if we do those first two things well, we should be better understanding our regional economy, right? And when we think about economic development, the more we can understand our industries here in the Evansville region, the better we can support them, partner with them to create opportunities both for individuals and the businesses. So at a high level, that's really what EREP and what Talent EVV are focused on in terms of cluster development. But I'm going to turn it over to Tara, and she's going to kind of walk us through from a state perspective what Connexus is really looking at and how that's informing some of what I've just teed up for you all today. And I will pause, make sure that we don't have any questions here. Any questions or comments so far? Awesome, Tara, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for the context. I really appreciate you guys having me today. I hope what I have to say will be relevant to you guys and you can apply, kind of what Connexus is working on to some strategies for the region too. Today, I'm going to focus on, what does Connexus do overall, but I'm also going to kind of dive in on specifically on our workforce related research and talent programming that we offer. And then we implement those programs, both statewide and regionally. It just kind of depends on which programs are in which regions, and we don't have like specific, clusters of regions where we have all of our programming focused, if that makes sense. So we are operating statewide. I hope that, you guys can maybe see, especially as you're benchmarking and some of the data that Tyler shared earlier in the presentation, as you're benchmarking yourselves against, similar regions across the country, you will be able to see, hopefully, Connexus as part of the asset portfolio that differentiates Evansville region, because we are focused specifically on advanced manufacturing and logistics. So next slide. I'm going to breeze through this presentation a little bit. I wanted to leave something comprehensive behind for you all so you can just get a full overview, but I don't have time to go over every slide or anything like that. We are strategically aligned in the sense that Connexus's primary focus is on productivity and wage growth. So all of our programming ties back to those goals. So increasing productivity for the advanced manufacturing and logistics industries, increasing wage growth for those industries and those jobs. You can go to the next slide. As Tyler already kind of teed up, obviously, Indiana is the most manufacturing intensive state in the nation. It also is our largest industry sector, accounting for 30% of our GDP. And in some counties, such as Gibson County in your region, it's up to 50% of the jobs in the region. So next slide. The L and AML, you guys have heard the motto, Crossroads of America, very much tied to manufacturing industry is the logistics industry. 650 billion in goods are transported through Indiana each year. Next slide. So that just tees up the importance of the industries for the state. You can go to the next one. So at Connexus, we really focus on connecting stakeholders who can impact the growth. So we work with industry, education, public sector, and philanthropy, and we collaborate to try to determine strategies and programs that will advance the AML sector and provide additional opportunities statewide. We don't just kind of make plans, we also run programs and amplify existing initiatives, and then we work to inform policies that strengthen the industries. You can go to the next one. So fitting Connexus in, we are part of CICP, which is Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. A bit of a misnomer, it was founded 20 years ago, focused on Central Indiana, but it has grown to a statewide organization. We have different industry clusters underneath that umbrella organization, and Connexus is specific to AML. We have a lot of public sector partnerships. We are a participating member of the Governor's Workforce Cabinet. We work very closely with the DWD, CHE, all the major colleges and universities, NDOT, and the IEDC. Next slide. We do this through our industry council. So we have 130 industry, education, and public sector partners on our council. I would say the balance of that is probably like 100 to 110 are industry folks. And so that council helps guide our programming. It helps inform our research. We convene working groups underneath that council, and then we convene quarterly meetings as well. Next slide. Just an example, kind of getting into the topic of today. So one of the challenges that we identified last year, up to 85,000 unfilled positions, so demand for positions outstripping the workforce availability. We did some research that equated that to $6.8 billion in net losses and foregone taxes for the state. Next slide. And so just a little bit more about what we did about this. So over the course of 2022, we worked with partners to create a playbook for narrowing that talent gap. And how we did this, obviously our council members, we hear it over and over again that workforce is a problem. They can't find enough workers to fill their unfilled positions. We did the research and worked with our working group to identify and frame the opportunity. So the unfilled positions are costing the industry billions of dollars. We identified, various pipeline leaks, aging workforce, women dropping out of the workforce, high school students dropping out of the workforce without a plan. And then last year, we gathered 100 stakeholders for a talent summit last summer, and really tried to work on this issue head on and address some recommendations. We created a recommendations white paper out of that effort. And if you go to the next slide, it's actually linked on that slide. So I linked here both the research that underlied that, so the state of Indiana's AML workforce, where we tried to understand the workforce, cost of unfilled positions, labor participation rates, retirement rates, all kinds of statistics. We also published regional profiles. So on our website, you can click on Region 11 and see just a kind of a snapshot of the workforce, super high level data. And then the leak proof is that white paper that I mentioned with strategies, with buy-in from state agency partners, academic partners, and industry partners as well. So we didn't create this kind of in a silo, if that makes sense. So you can read those if you're interested in your own time. Next slide. What we're working on now, so we're actually working on an interactive industry insights dashboard. So with this dashboard, you'll be able to filter by county, you'll be able to filter by subsector and occupation codes. You'll be able to see benchmarking Indiana versus Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky for wages and then other key metrics. So we're working on that. That's going to be published on our website and updated annually. And this is another project that is informed by industry. So we work hand in hand with our working groups to develop and understand what metrics are most important for people to be looking at. Next slide. Just a quick flyby on some of our talent programming. And I'm happy to follow up with anybody that wants to know more about any of these. So Catapult Indiana, that is our workforce training program, hands-on classroom instruction for unemployed, underemployed, and high school seniors with 10 sites throughout the state of Indiana. Next slide. We have our student industries program, which we just launched last year, where we're sharing best practices, case competition, and scholarships for student industries that are located within high schools throughout Indiana, and creating a network of those high school industries. We have the Modern Apprenticeship Program. We have education readiness grants, which I think that number might be a little bit outdated. So we've already funded 500,000. I think we got re-upped for another 500 to distribute. I know Southern Indiana Career and Technical Center was awarded 100,000 in 2022. That's the only one that I know of in your region. And then we also have this ambassadors program, which was one of the programs that came out of that leak-proof white paper from the talent summit that I discussed earlier. And that was piloted for the spring of this year in just 2 regions. So in Northeast Indiana, and then also in Region 9. But we are hoping that that will get funded to be a statewide program. And what that program is doing is to connect K-12 education with industry in a more strategic way, instead of kind of sporadic way that it is right now. So those ambassadors are focused regionally to try to build those connections between industry and education. You can go to the next slide. A couple other programs. We have our Rising 30 program, which we just had the award ceremony last Thursday, I believe. And several companies in your region nominated and awarded young professionals in manufacturing and logistics. So that's a really cool event. We have Make and Move, which is an awareness campaign. And then we have Movers and Makers of Tomorrow, which are college-based events. Next slide. In terms of digital adoption, we are the administrator of the Manufacturing Readiness Grants for the IEDC. So far, we've awarded 45,425 companies awarded across 73 counties. And you can see on the right-hand side, the red dots represent where the awardees are located. So it really spans statewide, and we have a strategic focus on making sure that we hit the counties that have less awards too. So our goal is to get to all the counties in Indiana. We're at 73 so far. We also do research in this space too. So we did a tech adoption study, an MRG impact report showing the impact of the MRG program to date. And then the third one is something that is in the works, which is national tech adoption benchmarking. And the last slide is just a few more bullets on our digital adoption programming. So peer-to-peer network forums, which are open to the public, emerging tech showcases also open to the public, and an entrepreneurship focus group. So very similarly aligned to the efforts in the Evansville region. I think that's all I've got. I am happy to take questions, but I also know that I took every bit of my 10 minutes. So.
No, Tara, thank you for walking us through that. And I think that, that's a great alignment and segue to both our next speaker, but also just why EREP and why Connexus are so intentionally focused on advanced manufacturing and logistics, and what it really looks like to have a statewide approach and a statewide strategy to cluster development specifically for those manufacturing partners. So thank you for all of the great context. Again, all of those resources in the slide deck will be on our webpage after the event. We'll get it uploaded. So if you all want to follow back up on the links, feel free to do that. So I think, again, good segue. We're going to talk about building intentional talent pipelines. So a lot of what Tara just shared with us in terms of challenges across the state of Indiana, I think you'll hear from both Jasmine and Mersada about what our region is doing to help advance and alleviate some of those challenges. So Jasmine, I'll turn it over to you and let you walk us through your slides.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tyler. Next slide. Some things can be left to random luck, but learning cannot be one of them. Learning and development need to be intentional. We know that when you are deliberately engaging an employee through learning, they are more likely to find meaning in their work. You can reshape your organization through a culture of learning. Jobs in a workplace can be transformed, and COVID-19 has only accelerated this. According to the World Economic Forum, 42% core skills required to perform existing jobs are expected to change over the next 2 years. That is just existing jobs, not to mention all the new ones that will continue to appear in a world that is changing faster and faster. Next slide. Because of this, Deaconess offers tuition reimbursement and step-up programs to find people in those critical skilled areas. All employees working full-time hours per pay period are eligible for both programs while enrolled in undergraduate or graduate level classes. So each employee that is eligible for tuition reimbursement will receive $5,250 per calendar year. And we also offer Step Up. Many of you may not have heard of this program before. This is a unique and limited opportunity being offered to Deaconess full-time employees. It is intended to provide eligible employees with the opportunity to achieve advanced education for defined positions while working at Deaconess and receiving pay for hours spent attending class or completing online coursework. The max hours each employee receives a week is 18 hours. So what that means is we will pay employees to sit in class and still receive their full salary. This has changed many employees' lives and their families' lives because, as many of you know, it's hard to juggle taking care of your kids, your household, coming home after work, making dinner for everyone, and studying late evenings. So this has changed many employees' lives. Next slide. So how are we attracting the right talent at Deaconess? We have found that 94% of employees have a retention rate into newly promoted positions following the completion of this program. If you're able to do this by even offering tuition reimbursement, a program just like Step Up, we highly recommend that you align the assistance to critical roles. This includes nursing, any positions in our OR, even our entry-level positions are part of our critical areas. So that does include front desk tasks, It could also include certified medical assistants as well. Next, we are increasing our top talent by offering job observations and shadowing opportunities for all. In the past, we actually offer this only to college students, but we have ramped this up and allowed high school students to observe the OR or emergency department. And this is very important because we are actually attracting them very early on and hope that they choose to go to college within the local area and then hopefully work for Deaconess one day. So if you guys can tie in observation or shadowing opportunities, even within your interview process, this could help you attract the right talent as well. We have found that many people, before they accept a position, want to know what your work environment looks like. So if you can offer them a shadowing opportunity, I believe that they would accept a position with you all as well. The next thing that we have is strengthening the pipeline through Earn and Learn partnership with universities. If you're not familiar with Earn and Learn, this program represents our commitment and our partnership with other institutions in our community. Earn and Learn is designed to help prepare you for any of our employees for success in the healthcare by providing them with industry experience and develop professional skills. Next slide. We hosted a spring education career fair actually a few weeks ago. We had a total of 260 high school students here at Deaconess. We received several requests for observations and shadowing opportunities. So far from year to date, we've had 350 people come to Deaconess to shadow or observe. So that is building our pipeline right there. They are coming to us. And we are able to attract them and hopefully recruit them for positions. Unfortunately, high school students cannot leave school. They have class or maybe they had finals, and many of them just recently graduated. So what we did was reach out to all the schools within the tri-state area and ask them if they were able to get on the bus and come to Deaconess for a education fair, and they did that. So we had 260 people, and with that being said, hopefully some of them have left wanting to work in the healthcare or eventually work somewhere within the tri-state area. Any questions?
Thank you, Jasmine, for walking us through that. Really appreciate it. And I'll double click on Earn and Learn. That's something I've had the chance to really work on in partnership with the health systems and the universities. This is really a streamlined approach to creating talent pipelines for entry-level positions. It's pretty simple, right? We provide a QR code to students. They can scan that QR code, see the opportunities that exist at both Deaconess and St. Vincent Ascension. So it's, two healthcare systems really working together for the benefit of the region and the benefit of a talent pool and a highly skilled talent pool. So it's exciting to see the collaboration happening and how our partners and employers are thinking about developing talent across the region in what I would consider a really new and innovative approach to hiring and retaining folks. So that's exciting. And Jasmine, thank you so much for walking us through that. I'll pass it off to Mersada, and she's going to share a little bit about the program that AmeriQual is engaging in terms of helping to create a talent pipeline.
Thank you very much. So if you can get me on to the next slide. So there's dozens of people on this call, and I'm sure some of you have come across either heard me talk about this or through other ways you've learned or heard about RAMP. So I do apologize if this is redundant, but we do take a lot of pride in this program, and there's lots of things that we've learned along the way. So about 5 years ago, I joined the opt-in program council, I guess, through EVSC. And so that was one of the sort of initial things that we talked about is how do we provide opportunities to students while partnering with business leaders and business area in the area to kind of help with that staffing and that workforce pipeline. Because, if you remember pre-COVID, we were all kind of struggling and competing for the same people here in the area. So we got to see a program down in Augusta, Georgia, that was similar to ramp, but actually very different. And so I'll kind of walk you through that. So we came back from that trip, and I knew I wanted to be a part of it. There was a lot of kind of prep work that we had to do. We were down there, I think in November, and we kicked off in August of the following year. So there wasn't a lot of time, but a ton of really, really hard work and kind of speeding through the process. So if you can take me through the next slide. So what is RAMP? It stands for Real World Application Maximizing Potential. As mentioned, it is a partnership with EVSC through the opt-in council and the program. And as far as we know, it is the first completely embedded work-based learning program in the state of Indiana and probably Midwest. We've not found one that is as embedded as RAMP is at AmeriQual still. There's obviously several different programs that work with students and whatnot, but what we have here, I think, is first of its kind. Well, it's probably now 2 years ago, we actually received an approved graduation pathway through the State Board of Education, which we had to go through, certain processes with that, and so it's a fully accredited, on its own, stands on its own type of a program. So what does it do, and kind of how, again, why was I driven to want to do it? Really, when we went down to Augusta, we got to see students who did not fit into the traditional school environment for a variety of reasons. That region is a little bit different. There was like one major employer, not, outside of the Gulf. There wasn't a ton of very exciting things and opportunities that happened for the residents. And so we got to hear and talk to the students and the school staff members about really just kind of how limited opportunities are, especially for children who, don't have a stable household, who might struggle financially, and just kind of things that are that sometimes a lot of us take for granted. And so we came here and kind of talked about similarities. What's different about Evansville is all the business that's available, the industry. So we don't struggle for opportunities. We actually have, quite a few of us here that compete for the talent, but we do have a population of students who don't have readily easy, available opportunities to them. They don't necessarily like the traditional school. They end up dropping out. And they're not the most desirable person that you want to go and hire. And so we thought, well, so there's an opportunity here to not only help AmeriQual and staffing, but also to help the region. So how do we help these young people to be prepared for workforce? Because ultimately, whether they graduate or not, they're going to be knocking at our doors and they're going to be looking for employment. So how do we help them before they kind of get to that point? So we set out to provide an innovative way to obtain a high school diploma for students who are not successful in a traditional school setting. We also talked a lot about empowering students that otherwise are not empowered because, again, they're disadvantaged from some perspective. And so we wanted to give them and show them that you can be successful. You can obtain, skills and learn things while also learning real life applications. And so, and again, that preparedness for workplace. So how do you help them to problem solve like in an actual situation versus sort of, theoretically talking about what might arise in a workplace and or in life in general. So again, for AmeriQual at that time, it really was to sort of help to figure out how to alleviate some of the staffing challenges that we were experiencing. And again, sort of looking at the community, how do you prepare this percentage of our young people that will be a part of our community for long term, and how do you provide opportunities and preparedness to be a successful and a contributing member of the community. You go to the next one. So how does it work? So we set out to get 80 students into the program each semester. We have usually hovered about 70, so about 35 per group, and we divide them into 2 groups. So there is a morning and an afternoon session, while one group is in the classrooms, which are here on site. And that was a big part of the investment, which we'll kind of talk about here in a minute. So they never go to a traditional school. They get brought up out here, and they go to school in the back. And the other group is on the production floor and working. Then at lunchtime, they have a lunch break, and then they switch. So the morning group goes to the classroom, and then the classroom group comes out to the floor. So they work 4 hours on the production floor, for which they get paid for, and then they switch out. And on the EVSC side, it's either in person, and I think they do offer some virtual opportunities for people who kind of want to work at their own pace. So what does it take? It really takes a lot of commitment, and it took a lot of really hard work to get this off the ground. So not only is it sort of the commitment from the people in the organization and your leadership, but it takes investment. So we were, just to get things going, just over $1 million in on the cost, and that included putting a building out in the back, doing everything that is necessary related to that. Making things and doing things in the plant that would make it safer for an environment for students who can be as young as 16 years old. Working with our insurance carriers to allow us this, getting all the liabilities and all the legal, and I mean there was a lot of work that kind of went into it. Policy reviews. So from an HR perspective and from your processes perspective, one has to be prepared to amend what you do today to accommodate, again, for a completely different group of people that are in your building, and all the needs that arise with that. Safety considerations we already kind of talked about. There were several things we had to do in the building in terms of like walkways and investing in signage and making sure that we create clear pathways for them to be able to follow versus just kind of being in the building, because you can't assume that a 16-year-old can think as even an 18-year-old, because we've seen a big difference in that age group, let alone an adult. Training, not only of the students, but training of your internal staff. We very, very quickly found out that people in manufacturing or non-school related jobs are in those jobs for a reason, and they don't always have the patience that it takes to deal with teenagers. And so there was a lot of training we had to do internally to sort of allow people and give them opportunities to express their thoughts and opinions, and kind of create training programs that to accommodate that specific need. Because again, supervising a group of teenagers is very different than supervising a group of adults. Patience was one of the things we had to learn along the way, and that continuous learning. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so here's kind of a report card. So we started in fall of 2019. Since then, 152 students have graduated. And these are students that would have not graduated if not for, and that's not being dramatic, and that's not being, that is literally, these students were handpicked to be in the program because they were struggling, whether attendance, whether academics, and whether behavior. These students were not going to graduate from their traditional high school. So 152 graduates, we hired 73. The retention rate is actually lower on that. And, because at 18 years old, you don't necessarily see yourself working in manufacturing, and or you want to go try different things. And that's okay. We are okay with that. Several of them have come back after they've gone and explored, other things, because they've realized that, once you're sort of out of that school environment, retirement and once you become an adult, things like benefits are important, vacation is important. And so all of those things that we've, learned them and offer them along the way. So fall 3, as we're kind of going into and planning for next school year, and actually, so before I forget, so this is a year-round program. Summer is when we go down in numbers, probably about 50, because some of them do choose to take a summer off, and that's okay. Others have to work, others want to graduate sooner, but some of them have to work. And so our enrollment is lower during summertime. So we really kind of do look at fall as sort of the beginning of next school year. We are working on improved pathways for students in the program, but then also in the career pathway. So sort of similar to what Jasmine was saying, offering job shadowing experiences. They are limited in what they can do while they're here, while they're in the program. And so we can only show them certain jobs. They can't really experience them hands-on. And sometimes that can be challenging, but we certainly are working on improving that job shadowing experience so they see a better future out, and more skilled jobs that are available here. And the impact, I mean, honestly, who is to tell? I think we're going to be able to see long-term what 152 students that have graduated, and how productive they are. So some of these things are kind of difficult to measure, but the stories that we hear from the students along the way, even some of them that come back from parents, from counselors that, express so much pride and gratitude for these opportunities for these students is really very difficult to measure, but it's very rewarding. I don't know. Do I have anything else, Tyler?
This is your last slide.
Okay. So great program. Not easy to do. It really takes a lot of hard work, but we are here. We're going into year 5. And we could not be any more committed to EVSC, to these students, and to the community, really, because we don't see it as a failure if somebody graduates and leaves us and goes to get a job at Berry. Again, hopefully we've taught them about attendance and about communication and about problem solving, and that ultimately helps our region and kind of fits in what we've sort of been talking about keeping people in Evansville and improving and increasing that talent pipeline. Does that help? Any questions?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
No, yeah, thank you, Mersada, for walking through that. I hope what the folks on the call really understand after we walk through Connexus and Deaconess and now AmeriQual is that there's no silver bullet to the talent challenge that our state's facing. But what you're seeing here and what I hope you all take away is that there are ways to innovate and have unique solutions to talent pipelines. Feel for, I think Mersada and I know Jasmine would love to connect with you all if you have more questions about your opportunities at your employers and workspaces, and just appreciate the engagement so far. And we will keep moving here because we're getting close on time. Eric, we'll pass it to you. And I think this is going to kind of be the final thread that we were talking about earlier in terms of startups funded, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So Eric, I will pass it over to you and you can kind of walk us through Elevate Ventures and a little bit about the entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Great. Well, thank you. So yeah, innovation is kind of one of those things that it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. It can happen anywhere. It can happen in a used synonymously with entrepreneurship, and that's kind of the direction I'll be taking the talk today. Is really just talking about entrepreneurship and the different types of entrepreneurship and what Elevate specifically focuses on. So if you want to go to the next slide. I thought it might be helpful to kind of start off by defining the type of entrepreneurship that Elevate focuses on. I think a lot of times we lump entrepreneurship into one large bucket, but I really, there's a white paper that was by the Kauffman Foundation that really divides entrepreneurship into two buckets. So you have the SME, small and medium enterprise entrepreneurship, which are your restaurants, your retail services, very critical to any economy. They're startups, they're entrepreneurs, they're putting it all on the line. But really that growth is limited to the size and the population of the community that they're located in. And so you can kind of see a couple of the bullet points that are focused on that SME side of it. The innovation-driven entrepreneurship is what Elevate focuses on. And so what that is it's over $1 billion market. It typically has some sort of intellectual property or competitive advantage that allows them to scale and to beat out the competition. And they're typically industries that can quickly, software being the largest of those, that you can just as easily sell it in a different state as you can in Indiana. So the jobs that it's creating are not necessarily limited to the population and to the community that you're located in. And really the question is, why do you need these innovation-driven businesses? And the answer to that is because they're the replacement crop for the large corporations that we have here today. You don't think of a lot of these businesses that have spoken just before me, but at one point they were startups, they were early stage, and they've just grown to be these major employers in the regions, but they weren't always that way. And so we need those replacement crops because as much as we'd like to think, companies don't last forever. And as they move on, as industries change, as companies are acquired, some move out, some move in, but we ultimately need that replacement crop to continue population and wage growth in the region. If you want to jump to the next slide, I'll jump a little bit more into specifically what Elevate focuses on. So you can see a couple of the industries on the left side here. So we focus a lot on B2B SaaS, that's software as a service. And so we have about a dozen portfolio companies in the region that we've invested in over the past 5 years. We've invested roughly $3 million into those companies to help them grow. And I think one of the telling statistics is that our average wage per salary for employees working for the companies that we funded is $73,000. So it's significantly higher than kind of the baseline for Evansville. So those jobs coming in are high wage jobs, and the companies, the dozen companies in aggregate employ roughly 60 people at this point. So we obviously hope that number continues to grow, but that's where it stands today. So Elevate is a two-part organization. On one side, we're traditional venture capital. We're investing dollars into companies in exchange for equity to hope to scale those companies and ultimately exit them in a 5 to 10 year range, providing a return for our investors and our constituents, one of the largest of which being the IEDC. So really returning that money back to the state so they can reinvest it and kind of continue the cycle. So we make investments in companies. On the other hand, we're also a venture development organization. We work with early stage startups. Again, kind of assuming that they fit that IDE model to help grow them and scale them and show them what resources are available and help them get over traditional hurdles that people find in the industry. I'm going to go to the next slide. I think the last slide really is just an overview of some of our programs. We start when a company is extremely early. So if you're working with somebody with just an idea, sketched out on a napkin, happy to meet and kind of talk them through those. We have the CIF, which is the Community Ideation Fund, which is kind of the first money into a business. It's $0 to $20,000. We have the Nexus Pitch Competition, which gets them up to $100K into their business. We match SBIR grants, which are traditionally research-driven grants provided through national programs. And then we continue funding those companies. So if we fund a company for $20,000 and they hit those milestones that we've laid out for them, then we can then invest $100,000 and then $1 million and continue to help that company grow. And we're also always investing alongside other investors. So it's not all on us to fund those companies, but we find those companies and then we prepare them to go out to the capital markets and raise additional funds. And so by the time they're raising $10 million to fully scale the business, 5 years in, Elevate might be putting in $1 million of that dollars, and then there's co-investment coming into the state, traditionally from in-state as well as out-of-state investors that can really help scale and grow those businesses. So happy to meet with any startups that anybody, comes across on a daily basis. Again, even if it's as early as a napkin, drawing on a napkin, because we've really seen how we can help those companies from idea through tens of millions of dollars in exits. Great.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, so much for that. I know we're a couple minutes over time. If folks have questions, feel free to, we'll all hang out for a minute or two, but drop them in the chat if you have to run. The recording will be on the website, so www.evvregion.com. Appreciate everyone's engagement. I hope what you all took away from the session today is that there are a lot of strategies and players in this space to help advance jobs and wage growth here in the Evansville region, but also a great deal of work in understanding what our sectors and subsectors really need in terms of resources and support in relation to capital investment and talent pipelines and all the things that help sustain their growth and their expansion. So again, thank you all for logging on. We will have our 5th and final virtual session next month that will be covering upward mobility. So we'll be covering how do families and individuals move into self-sufficiency, and we'll have a handful of stakeholders there to walk us through the strategies and high impact opportunities that are happening across the region. So thank you all for logging on. Appreciate your time today and hope everyone has a great week and weekend. Take care.